Greetings, my friends. Welcome to the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with yours truly, Dr. India White. I'm thrilled to be here with you this week. I know that school has just started back. We've got so many different things going on for you parents out there with students in sports, band, things like that. Hats off to you. For you teachers out there planning and cranking it out, you leaders, thank you for all that you do. Know that it's going to pay off in the end. With that said, let's transition. Let's talk about some really cool things today. First things first. The Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White will be featured on the X Factor EDU network hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph. It can also be found on Spotify and all of my social media outlets. My social media outlets for you guys today: Facebook is Miss India White, LinkedIn is The India White, Twitter is Indy Speak and Teach, Instagram Indy238, YouTube is India White 123, and TikTok is Dr. India White. I'm excited to attend a couple of events. I know at the end of this week, I'll be heading to La Crescent Hoka School District in Minnesota. Can't wait to see you guys there. We'll also be going to NCSM, NCTM together. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there. Looking forward to ICTM, OCTM, and beyond. Thank you to all of those again for including me in your program. I'm highly honored, and I hope that we will be gritty together. I also wanted to remind you guys to please check out the website, www.india-white.com, for books, blogs, or to schedule me for a speaking or coaching event. And I also wanted to remind you guys to look at the Grit Mini Workshop when you get a chance on the Grassroots Workshops website. And also a reminder that if you are trying to close the achievement gap, but you're having classroom management issues, which I know you guys are just getting started, so you might want to start tapping into grit, seeing that you're just starting the year. This would be a great motivator throughout the year for you. So this is a show for you, or even if you're trying to motivate your students to do work for you, then you can join this podcast. Just, listen in and, take it in, and whether you're driving or you're, reflecting on the day, trying to figure out what else to do. And we're going to just really knock it out together. So with that said, I do want to transition now. And I want to talk with you today about grit. I want to talk to you about grit for winners because, grit is a trait, and it's something that as we build upon our grit levels and we continue to increase grit, it will help us to win in life. And of course, my acronym for grit, great resilience in time, because the last thing you want is to have a bunch of passion and not get anywhere in life. And, we all have that friend that is very passionate and determined, and they are telling you all the time about how they're going to do ABC. They're going to conquer the world, and wait till I get done with my business, wait till I get done with my book, wait till I get done with this, and they're not producing anything. And so you're still waiting, right? And hey, we've been guilty of that sometimes. I know we all have different things that we're, taking on, different tasks. But one thing I will say is, if you're trying to win in life, definitely have a list, have a goal, have a bucket list, have something, and then, have a time frame as to how you can execute that so you can get it done. And that's going to happen through grit. So I want to talk with you about grit for winners. I'm going to talk with you about a study I found about students and how grit affects students. And then we're going to talk about just in general, some good things that people have, discovered, written about, things like that. So allow me to share my screen with you. We're going to talk first about the study on grit and how it says that grit, it strongly increases in early childhood, and it's related to parental background. That's very powerful. And so let's look in here. Let's look at the abstract. Abstract tells you a lot. So it says, grit has been identified as very important in non-cognitive skill that is positively related to educational achievements and labor market success. So this thing, it's not just about keeping it inside of the classroom. This is going to spill out into their everyday life, their everyday environment. Okay. And it says here, recently it's been found malleable through interventions in primary schools, yet little is still known about the development of early childhood. So this is why they did their study. So they present, it says, an experiment with 429 children ages 3 through 6 years old. So they have a pretty good chunk of kids here. It says, so age 3 to 6 years old. Well, actually, that's pre-K to like first, second grade. Okay, so it says, we measured the level of grit as students' perseverance in a real effort task and their willingness to challenge themselves successfully with another more difficult task, and based on a principal component analysis, we find that grit increases strongly with age. I told you guys, grit is it's like a muscle. It can increase over time. So they found that grit increases strongly with age. It says parents' assessment of their child's grit is correlated with the actual behavior of their child, and education of the parents plays a role, interesting, for perseverance. Yet children's level of patience is unrelated to their grit level. So that's interesting. But look at that. It says that their grit increases strongly with age. So let's start looking here. So, of course, they're talking about some of the studies. While grit is often defined as a combination of an individual's perseverance and effort and passion with a particularly long-term goal, the definitions one can find in the literature differs in nuances. Okay, it says it's often related to an ability to work hard, okay, to be persistent in a task, to challenge oneself, to not give up, even in the case of intermediate drawbacks. That's very important. Okay, and it says despite mild differences in definitions, the literature has produced a coherent pattern about the importance of grit. Again, the literature has produced a coherent pattern about the importance of grit. It has been proven to be highly indicative of educational achievement, as well as earnings, tenure, and promotions in companies, or innovativeness, right, and success of entrepreneurs. Very true. And so it says here, because of the importance of, or for later outcomes in life, recent work has examined how grit can be trained in an 8 to 10-year-old primary school. So, and it talks about how little is known so far about the development of grit in early childhood. So this is why they're doing their study. So they have a study with 429 students, like we said before, ages 3 to 6, to determine to what extent grit increases with age. So is this working? Does it increase? What happens? And what factors drive its potential development? So this is pretty good. So it says preschool age has been identified as a critical period to develop the economic preferences and of non-cognitive skills more generally, okay? All right, so now let's keep going. So it's saying here, we consider perseverance as an ability to work hard, the willingness to challenge oneself by choosing voluntarily a more difficult task when given a choice, and the likelihood. So that part. So it says here, choosing voluntarily a more difficult task when given the choice. It's all about how the choice is presented. There's one thing to cultivate grit, and then there's one thing to oppress someone and make them feel like you're putting a burden on them, right? That's not what we want for our kids. We want to challenge them and give them more difficult tasks, giving them a choice and making sure that we've also set them up for success, that no matter what they are trying to do, they can still be gritty and still persevere. Okay, so let's keep going. So it says we can examine both the compound measure of each of its components separately. As grit has been linked to time preferences, we also consider this link a robust check. Okay, so complementing children's data with the survey among the parents, see, this is why I have a grit survey as well. It's important, right? Because you need to know what's going on in the homes. So it says it allows the studying the role of the family background for the early development of grit. The family environment and parents' characteristics have a large influence on various cognitive and non-cognitive skills. I found that in my study as well, that, family can be a factor towards success and towards persistence. And so look here. So it says, but in the relation of family background to the formation of grit in early childhood, it's still unexplored. So in sum, our paper is the first to present evidence on the development of grit in children as young as ages 3 to 6. So that's pre-K to first grade, second grade. Okay, and it says it's able to present both the composite score of grit that captures many facets associated with grit, but at the same time, it can present evidence for single components separately, and it adds a parental background. You've got to get parents involved, right? And then it says, and it gives us data to enrich our understanding of whether and to which extent grit develops in early age. So let's look at their study. So they're spring of 2017. Okay, this was by University of Innsbruck. Okay, and so They're talking here about the students. They visited each kindergarten on 2 or 3, if the number of children was very large, consecutive days. All the children were introduced one by a trained experimenter. So they're saying this thing was organized, well vetted, so this study can be trusted. Okay. Overall, 91% of the students could answer all control questions. Okay, so controlled questions of the study indicating that we succeeded in explaining the task. Good, even to our youngest. So they're basically saying that, the instruments that they're using, the control questions and things like that were not vague or, weird, so that the results that you're given can be trusted, right? So let's keep going. They talk about the anonymity, which is important, right? To make sure that you can't, have any bias or trace anything, or, say, oh, I know this student said that because I recognize this. And, good. All right, let's keep going. Let's go to the findings. Let's find out what's going on. They had a perseverance task. They had the time perseverance task. It let children choose among 3 options. So in option 1, they received 2 tokens on the same day, but none the next day. Option 2, they got 1 token today, 2 tokens tomorrow. And option 3, paid no tokens, but 4 tokens on the next day. So they could save, for the second day, and basically the tokens would double in value. So the students that wanted more tokens, of course, are gonna, wait out and be more greedy, right? So let's look at the results. This is the good stuff, right? So in the following, we first present descriptive results of each of the components of grit: perseverance, that's everything; willingness to challenge oneself, right? It's all about challenging yourself. It's when you're trying to win with grit, you are the focus, right? It's not your neighbor. It's you. It's how do you develop yourself? How do you become better yourself? Okay. And then it says, and following through on a puzzle task. And then they combine those 3 components. So perseverance, willing to challenge themselves, and following through on a puzzle task. They combine those 3 components by means of principal components, okay, to get an encompassing measure of grit, right, that does not rely on a single measure. So for all you doctorate dorks out there, hey, rock on. I'm with you. You're getting this, right? So it's saying here's figure 1 down here, and it's talking about how the relation of age to each of the 3 components of grit. So those 3 components that I just listed, right? And now it's saying here, when they're looking at these components, let's see what's happening with time and as they're doing all of the different different tasks. So did they do the difficult puzzle? Did they do, did they persevere here in this task? There's like all this stuff. Okay. And so long story short, they're saying here the behavior in the puzzle and the perseverance task by age. The upper left panel, it showed the fraction of children who chose the more difficult puzzle. The upper right panel showed the fraction of children who finished the puzzle that they had chosen by the end of their visit. And then the lower panel showed the performance of students who actually persevered in the perseverance task. All right, so let's get down to what they found. So looking at the behavior across 3 choices, we can see that the children who sort more beads are more likely to choose the difficult puzzle, and they're more likely to follow through on their choice of completing a puzzle. So it says the level of enjoyment of the task also excited the perseverance task, which is weakly positively related to the performance in the perseverance task. Parents have a tertiary education is significantly positively related to the number of beads collected in the perseverance task, but reduces the likelihood to complete the puzzle task. Very interesting. Parents from households with single parents, which account for 10% of all households, are more likely to challenge themselves with the more difficult puzzle. Very interesting. Household income raises the likelihood of a child to choose the difficult puzzle as a larger challenge. So in their discussion, they found that grit is an important non-cognitive skill for educational and labor success. Work has concentrated on adults' level of grit and how it relates to professional and personal life outcomes, or on how to teach grit to primary school children. So what they're saying here is the evidence on grit and its development in younger preschool children has been lacking. So they have shown that with this sample of over 400 students, ages 3 to 6 years old in kindergarten, that the level of grit increased significantly. So they showed here that with this sample of over 400 students, I think it was 429 students, that the level of grit increased significantly in early childhood. So for measuring grit, they relied on a composite measure of perseverance, right? The willingness to challenge oneself. So those are the 3 tiers, right? And the ability to follow through on the challenge, meaning it successfully. Okay. And then based on the parental questionnaire, they found that parents have a good understanding of the children's level of grit. Family background characteristics also relatively matter a little bit, right? Even though parents' education matters for perseverance, and single parent status is also indicative of the willingness to challenge oneself and of the composite grit score. Okay, so very interesting. And so it says, finally, further research would be welcome to understand why and under which conditions grit increases for the first years of one life. So is it the parenting style? What is it? Peer effects? So I found that very interesting. So there you have it. So this is a really cool study. And it's, again, this study, if you want to dig through it again later, grit increases strongly in early childhood. This was published March 2022. Okay. So very thankful for Maddie Sutter, Anna, and Claudia for their work on this. Okay. So that was pretty neat to talk about how grit increases with time, especially for the younger kiddos. And I know some people are like, oh, well, is grit needed for all ages? Well, here you can see definitely yes. And I think that, like I said, grit is huge for helping students to have a healthy understanding of goal setting and time management, which is needed for success. So now let's look and see what else, others have said to us about grit and what they say just in general. So I found this really cool article here. It says, what is grit and how to develop it for a successful life? Ashley Elizabeth. Okay. Awesome. So she says, have you ever met someone who thrives through adversity and transform their plan or their pain into opportunities of growth? And she talks about the Queen, Dr. Duckworth, and how she describes these people as possessing grit. From her research, she's found that grit is what separates those who are successful from those who fail. Powerful. Let's repeat that. Grit is what separates those who are successful from those who fail. So what is grit? So she has her table of contents. She says, in her words, Ashley saying, it's passion and perseverance equals achievement. So, so basically, grit is sticking with your future day in and day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years. And so this right here is actually the area of focus, is this quote here, because the thing is, Dr. Duckworth was saying it's sticking with it for years. She said that in her TEDx. You got to be motivated enough to stick with it for that long, right? You can't unplug. You just got to hang in there. Okay. I admire those that, they're always, they're just very rigorous and always achieving something, always, running marathons, losing weight, doing all kind of great things. I just think it's fabulous, and all of that, it happens through grit. So let's keep going here. So it says, why is grit important? So it says, research indicates that the ability to be gritty, to stick to those things that are important to you and then bounce back from failure is an essential component for success because you're trying to win. You have to have grit if you want to win in life. Okay. It says you can have all the talent in the world, but you'll never achieve the goals without effort. This is why grit is the foundation of success. Again, she says this is why grit is the foundation of success. You got to bleed grit, man. If you're really wanting to win, you have to have grit. I'm sorry. If you're trying to work on, a dissertation, you're trying to write a book, you're trying to, run a business, you're trying to raise your children, you're trying to lose weight, whatever it is in life, you have to have grit as a foundational component of success. I'm sorry. There's no way around it. You have to have some type of level of grit. You have to cultivate grit. I can't tell you how many times, when I was studying and preparing and doing what I could to finish school, that there were times that I would not have finished if I didn't have grit. I'll never forget the time that grit really made sense for me, I guess. I was working on my doctorate at UF, go Gators, and I just could not get over this hurdle. I was stuck on chapter 3, and those that you've written your dissertations, you totally get what I'm saying. I was stuck. And I could not produce more. Like I don't know. I just was in a brain fart. I could not do it. Um, and I was starting to give up. I just was like, I don't know what else to do. So I pulled a grit move. One of my grit moves. So if you have a grit move, do you have grit moves that you go to? Like, what is your grit move? That's a good question. I want you to ask your students, talk about grit and say, what is your grit move? What is your grit move? What do you do to bounce back? What do you do to push forward, to push through? What is your grit move? Do you know yourself enough to know how you operate in grit, how you handle grit? So for me, my grit move was I had to get removed from my comfort zone, which was my place at the time. And I had to get away from the comfort of, the comfort of my environment, because if I stayed home, I would probably go to bed or do something, right? Relax. So I got away from that. I went to Panera Bread and I said, I'm not leaving here until I produce something. And I just was so sick and tired of being stuck. And I just started going at it, y'all. I started researching. I researched everything you could research. I mean, it was like everything you could think of about perseverance, persistence, self-efficacy, like so much. And I said, I'm not leaving. And y'all, do you know, when I got up from that place, I think I wrote an extra 70 pages. It was crazy. I was there all day and I wrote and wrote and wrote. I mean, from morning all the way to probably when they kicked me out, I think about like 9 o'clock. I like lived in Panera Bread. I would not leave. I would stay. And some of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, right? I would stay. This was my grit move. I had to get away from my comfort zone, my environment, my familiar place, and I had to get away alone somewhere and just work. I would listen to Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. He's like my favorite. I would just put on Bach and work. And I cut off everything, put my phone away, just put everything away. I didn't care. And I worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked until finally, when I got up, I had so many pages written that then we had to come back and say, okay, we've got to, adjust, we've got to cut down, da 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 da. And you know how that is for those that have been there. And so, but that changed my life. Changed my life. Because before I was willing to break that barrier, like how like planes have to break that barrier to really fly in the air. It was kind of like that, before I could really break that barrier, I had to pull a grit move to do it. And so I want to encourage you that if you're trying to win through grit, you've got to find a grit move for yourself. And so for me, like I told you, it was just getting alone and blocking everything out until I got it done. Now, your students might need the same type of encouragement to do the same or something similar. But you got to find out what works for your students, what works for you as a leader. What is your grit move? What are you going to do to win? Because, you only get one shot at this. This is like the Olympics, and you don't want to come so close that you miss it, or you don't want to, assume, oh, you got this. Like there was someone was, I don't know if this was real or if I think it was real. Someone was running. I don't know if it was Olympics or whatever. It was like a track meet. And she was so confident that she was going to win that she started like slowing down and like posing and like, hey. And then she didn't know that right by her, the girl was going to steal it. She was going to steal it. And the girl won. And then the look on her face was like, OMG, I should have just kept pressing on until I know I crossed the line. And because she got comfortable and she assumed I've got this other girl came in, and it was just really sad. And so if you're really wanting to win, you've got to figure out what your grit move is, and you just got to do it. You got to make it happen. So I want to encourage you, find your grit move as a leader, as a teacher, as a parent, find your grit move. How are you going to help cultivate grit in your child, in your students? What are you going to do? Okay. So let's keep going. Let's get back to this. Grit important. Like she said, you can have all the talent in the world, but you will not achieve your goals and effort. This is why you need grit for the foundation of your success. So what are the characteristics? So let's keep scrolling here. So one of the characteristics, of course, is passion. If you're not passionate, it's really going to affect your grit. It really is. Okay. If you don't know how to persevere, you're going to have a problem. Okay. So it says here, I've never met a strong person who had an easy breezy past. Very, very true. Many successful people are built from the ground up, like Simone Biles. You've got Serena Williams and so many others that are just amazing, and they had a very wonderful, humble beginning, and they made something out of it. So she's got perseverance and she's got resilience. It's all about resilience, great resilience in time, right? So it says gritty people are resilient in the sense that they thrive through adversity. Wow. So many people can play victim or fall victim because of adversity. But when you have grit, you're choosing to win and thrive through adversity. Again, you're winning through that adversity. You're fighting ample opportunities through adversity. They reframe every challenge as an opportunity and do the work to become the master of their own emotions. Okay, that's powerful. It talks about how research reveals that resilience is a test of how tough you are. And instead, it has everything to do with your willingness to keep trying after others have given up. I'm going to say this too, not just after others have given up, but after you have even maybe thrown in the towel. You're choosing to reset and try again. So what's an example of grit? Let's look at her example of grit. So it says, it was like the other day in my life, I got on my motorcycle and rode off because I was just going up the road. I decided not to wear my helmet. Little did I know that this sudden decision would change my entire life. I was supposed to be back home in 15 minutes, but that didn't happen. 5 minutes into it, oh goodness, she had an accident. I hit my head on the pavement, suffered a traumatic brain injury, was rushed to the hospital to undergo surgery. So that's a lot there, right? So she says, this experience left me with PTSD and anxiety. And she says, however, it gave me a second chance to recreate my life and to develop unshakable mental strength and grit. I love that. And unshakable mental strength and grit. Unshakable grit. Unshakable mental strength, because you have to win, right? So she says here, it's been 3 years since my accident. And look at her encouraging us, right? Amazing. So it's been 3 years since my accident. I'm not the same person I used to be. I'm stronger than I've ever been. I chose to transform my pain into power. That's what it's all about. To this day, I continue to pull upon my grit. Oh my goodness. Wow. It has become my superpower. This is so beautiful. Kudos to her. Okay. Wow. So she's saying, how do you develop grit? So this is what worked for her. So she's saying you want to practice. Okay. So practice and repeat it and then keep persevering. Connect with your purpose. That's the second tip that she says here. Connect with your purpose. And then it says, after studying 16,000, my goodness, people, Duckworth found that grittier people are dramatically more motivated than others to seek a meaningful, other-centered life. Beautiful. So connect with your purpose. So practice, connect with your purpose, and don't give up. This is her third point. Let's see what else she's got to say. Don't give up, right? And then the bottom line is you have one life, so make it a masterpiece, right? Write your story. She says, don't ever give up on your dreams. Strive to be a gritty person in every area of your life. This is beautiful. And so I hope that you guys enjoyed this show today about grit for winners and how you can be gritty, not only in the classroom, but just in general. And I hope that as you're building, as you're leading, as you're writing lesson plans, as you're figuring out the master schedule, as you're figuring out who needs to be promoted in your district to help you as a superintendent, I just want to wish you the best. And I want you to win through grit. So whatever you do, take grit with you and know that the best is yet to come. So thanks so much, guys, for joining me again today on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast. I absolutely love coming on here with y'all. Again, the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White will be featured on the X Factor EDU network, hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph. And you'll find it on Spotify. Thank you, Dr. Matthew, for that. Follow me on social media, y'all. Let's do this. Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is the India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123, and TikTok is Dr. India White. I will see you guys soon in Minnesota. I will see you. I'm looking forward to a wonderful time. I'll also be at NCSM and NCTM with you guys, ICTM and OCTM and ATM&E and Northwest Math Conference and so many others. Let's do this together, guys. I'm super excited. Okay. Check out the Grit Mini Workshop, Grassroots Workshop. Check it out. See if that, is a good fit for you. See what you can take out of it. See what you can take back to your team. And again, this podcast was, if you're trying to close the achievement gap, if you're having classroom management issues, if you're having students that just aren't motivated to do work and you need something to help them, you can always tune in here. You'll find something to take back to the classroom, to take back to education. So with that said, guys, it's been fabulous hanging out with you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in, giving me another hour of your time at the Grit and Equity Talks podcast. And until next time,